Captain Daniel Morgan stood at the large window of his ship and watched the stars move slowly across the dark space. He had been working in the Terran diplomatic fleet for 23 years now, and in all that time he had never used his weapons to fight anyone. The humans had built a name for themselves across all the planets and star systems as the peaceful ones who liked to talk and solve problems instead of fighting wars. Everyone in the galaxy knew humans as the patient, species who would sit and discuss things for hours and days, until everyone agreed on something. The big meeting room of the Galactic Council was on a planet called Zentara Prime, and it was made of beautiful crystal that shined in the light. This place was built to show how different species had been working together peacefully for hundreds of years. Ambassador Claire Hunt was the person who spoke for all humans at these meetings. She sat with leaders from 47 other species who all came from different worlds. The Vraxians were tall creatures that looked like giant insects with 4 arms and big eyes that could see in many directions at once. They were the ones who controlled most of the military power in the galaxy. The Kelthera were beings who lived in water, and they talked to each other using lights that came from their bodies. They were in charge of the trade routes that connected different star systems. The Morgath Collective were strange life forms made of silicon instead of carbon, like most other species, and they thought in ways that were hard for others to understand. They managed all the technology and computer systems that everyone used. Humans had a small role in all of this. They were the ones who helped when 2 species had a disagreement. They would sit between angry parties and help them find solutions that made everyone happy. They kept peace in areas where different species wanted the same territory. Other species in the galaxy often made jokes about humans and said they had forgotten how to be soldiers and warriors. People said that humans had given up being aggressive and violent 3 generations ago after some terrible wars on Earth almost destroyed their whole planet and killed most of their people. Lieutenant Kevin Shaw sat in the operations center of the Valiant, watching the screens that showed all the messages coming in and going out. Messages came all the time from human colonies on different planets, trade deals with the Kelthera merchants who sold goods across space, and cultural programs with the Delani, who were known as the most peaceful species in the galaxy. Everything looked normal and routine. There was nothing strange or dangerous in any of the communications, but Claire noticed something odd during the latest council meeting. The Vraxian military leader, whose name was Warlord Thraxus, had been talking to other aggressive species and trying to get them to support him in something. The Morgath Collective stayed neutral and just watched everything carefully. The smaller and weaker species looked worried and nervous whenever Thraxus spoke. Claire had people working for her who gathered secret information, and one of them managed to record a private meeting where Thraxus was talking to his supporters. In that meeting, Thraxus said the humans are weak and they have become soft because all they do is talk and negotiate. He said that when we attack the outer colonies where humans live, the humans will just want to talk about it. He said humans always want to negotiate and discuss things instead of fighting back. Claire sent a secret coded message back to the military command on Earth. The message was encrypted so nobody else could read it. The answer came back from Earth in just a few hours. It was only 2 words, but those 2 words made Claire feel cold and scared. The message said, "Protocol remembered." Daniel received similar orders from Earth Command at the same time. The Valiant changed its course and started moving away from the normal diplomatic routes where they usually traveled. The ship headed toward the outer territories where the smaller human colonies were located. Other human ships across the galaxy also started changing their positions. They moved quietly and carefully in a coordinated pattern. Nobody made any announcements about what they were doing. Nobody declared anything publicly. The human ships just prepared themselves silently. Commander Lisa Grant sat alone in her quarters looking at tactical data and battle plans on her computer screen. She had spent years studying the old Earth Wars, which was a period of time that most humans tried to forget and never talked about. Her grandfather had been a soldier in those wars before the Great Peace happened. He had told her stories that were never written in the official history books. He told her things about what humans could do when they were pushed too far and had no other choice but to fight. Her grandfather had told her something she never forgot. He said, "We did not stop being warriors and soldiers. We just chose to be something better than that. But the ability and capacity to fight never left us. It is in our blood and in our history and in our memories as a species. We buried it deep inside ourselves because we understood what we truly were and what we were capable of doing. And the rest of the galaxy should hope and pray that we never have to remember those abilities again. The crew of the Valiant noticed that something was different. The captain, who was usually calm and friendly, now had a serious look on his face. The diplomatic mission they had been on was cancelled without explanation. New orders came in that were marked as classified and top secret. Lieutenant Shaw found himself running weapons diagnostics and checking systems that had not been used in decades. Commander Grant was suddenly training the crew in combat procedures that most of them had only read about in training manuals. All across human space, the same thing was happening. Ships that had been on peaceful missions turned around and repositioned themselves. Colony defense systems that had been in storage were taken out and activated. Weapons that had been kept in locked facilities were distributed to trained personnel. Communication networks switched to military encryption. Everything changed, but it all happened so quietly that nobody outside of human space noticed anything unusual. The other species in the galaxy continued with their normal activities. The Vraxians kept building up their military forces. The Kelthera focused on their trade routes and making profit. The Morgath Collective worked on their quantum computers and technology projects. The smaller peaceful species worried about the growing tension, but hoped that the humans would mediate and solve any problems that came up. Everyone believed that humans would talk and negotiate and find peaceful solutions like they always did. Nobody in the galaxy understood what was really happening. They thought humans were preparing for diplomatic negotiations. They assumed the movement of human ships was just routine repositioning. They believed that humans would continue being the patient, peaceful mediators they had always been. But something had changed. A switch had been flipped. A decision had been made at the highest levels of human command. The long peace was ending, and nobody except the humans knew it yet. The Vraxian fleet attacked early in the morning when the colony was just waking up. The place they attacked was called New Providence, and it was a human settlement on the edge of space near where the Kelthera traded their goods. 12,000 people lived there in peace, doing normal things like farming and building and raising families. The attack was brutal and violent, and it was planned carefully to send a message to all humans across the galaxy. Warlord Thraxus wanted everyone to know that he could hurt humans whenever he wanted. Lieutenant Amy Parker was drinking her morning coffee and getting ready for work when the loud alarm started, screaming through the buildings. She worked at the Colony Communication Center, which was a civilian job that she took after she retired from military service years ago. She looked at the big screens on the wall and saw dozens of Vraxian warships appearing out of nowhere in the space above the colony. The ships were huge and dark, and their weapons were already charging up and glowing with energy, ready to fire. A message came through the communication system, and the computer translated it into human language. The voice said, "This is Commander Vrex of the Vraxian Third Fleet. You have 60 seconds to tell us you surrender. If you do not surrender, we will start bombing your colony from space and destroy everything." Governor Richard Cole was in the command center of the colony, and his face was pale and white with fear, but his voice was steady and strong. He told his staff to open a communication channel to the Galactic Council so they could watch what was happening. He also told them to send messages to every human ship that was close enough to receive them. He said, "Tell them we will not surrender." The 60 seconds went by very quickly. The Vraxian ships opened fire with all their weapons at once. Bright bolts of plasma energy shot down from space and hit the protective shields around the colony. The shields tried to absorb the energy, but there was too much power. The plasma broke through and started hitting buildings and melting metal and starting fires everywhere. The defensive weapons that the colony had were designed to fight off small pirate ships and space rocks, but they could not do anything against a real military fleet. Amy kept broadcasting messages even as the building shook and trembled around her. She said, "This is New Providence calling any human ship that can hear us. We are being attacked by Vraxian military forces. They did not give us any warning. They did not try to negotiate or talk to us first. We are defending ourselves as best as we can, but we need help. Please, if anyone can hear this message, we need help right now." The Valiant was 3 hours away if they traveled at maximum speed. Captain Daniel Morgan stood on the bridge of his ship watching the live video feed that was coming from New Providence. His jaw was tight and his hands were clenched into fists. Lieutenant Kevin Shaw was working frantically at his station, trying to coordinate with other human ships in the area and calculating how fast they could all get to the colony. Commander Lisa Grant was preparing all the weapon systems and running tests on equipment that had not been used in real combat for decades. Kevin suddenly called out to the captain. He said, "Sir, Earth Command is sending a message on all frequencies and channels. It is using the old military code from before the Great Peace. I have not seen this code used in my entire career." Daniel looked at the message and recognized it immediately. It was 3 words in the ancient military protocol that had not been used in 70 years. The message said, "Rules have changed." At the Galactic Council building on Zentara, Prime Ambassador Claire Hunt was showing the video footage to all the delegates from every species. They watched the Vraxian attack happening in real time with high-definition cameras showing every detail. The attack was unprovoked, which meant the Vraxians had no good reason to do it. It was merciless, which meant they showed no kindness or mercy to the civilians who lived there. Some of the delegates started protesting and saying this was wrong. Others stayed silent because they were calculating what this meant for their own political interests and power. Warlord Thraxus stood in front of all the council delegates, and he showed no shame or regret for what he had done. He said the humans were controlling the territory illegally, and it belonged to the Vraxians by ancestral right, which meant his species had owned it long ago in ancient times. Claire looked at him with cold, angry eyes, and her voice cut through the chamber like a sharp knife through soft butter. She said, "You killed 12,000 civilians who were living peacefully. You had no ancestral claim to that territory, and everyone here knows it. You attacked without making any declaration of war. You broke every single law in the Galactic Charter that all of us signed and agreed to follow. And now, Warlord Thraxus, you and your people are going to learn what humans really are when we stop being patient with those who hurt us." She pressed a button on her communication device and transmitted a single command to every human ship in the entire galaxy. It was just 2 words, but those 2 words had not been spoken or transmitted in 70 years of peace. The message said, "Weapons free." Back at New Providence, the colony was burning and many buildings had collapsed into ruins. But the defensive grid was still working in some areas, and the people were still fighting back with whatever weapons they had. The Vraxian fleet remained in orbit above the planet, conducting systematic destruction, which meant they were destroying things in an organized, methodical way. They were taking their time because they did not think anyone would stop them. On board the Valiant, every crew member received the message from Earth Command. Weapons free meant they had permission to use any and all weapons without restriction. It meant the rules of engagement had changed completely. It meant humans were no longer going to hold back or show restraint. Daniel looked at his crew and saw the change in their faces. The diplomatic officers who had spent years negotiating and talking now had hard expressions that showed they remembered their military training. The peaceful mediators were becoming something else. They were becoming what their species had been before the Great Peace. Lisa ran final checks on all weapon systems. Everything showed green, which meant all systems were ready and functional. The plasma cannons had not been fired in anger for decades, but they worked perfectly. The railguns were tested and operational. The missile batteries were loaded and armed. And there was something else. There were prototype weapons that other species did not know existed. Weapons that humans had developed in secret during their years of peace. Weapons that no other species in the galaxy had ever seen before. The Valiant pushed its engines to maximum power and headed toward New Providence. 3 other human ships changed course and headed to the same location. The Sovereign and the Liberty and the Constitution were all coming. They were all diplomatic vessels just like the Valiant. But they were also something the galaxy had not understood. They were warships that had been disguised as peaceful diplomatic ships. They had always been warships. Humans had just chosen not to use them that way. Until now, the military experts and analysts across the galaxy had made a very big mistake in their understanding of humans. They had assumed that 3 generations of peace meant that humans had forgotten how to fight wars. They thought that humans had lost the knowledge and skills needed for combat. But they were completely wrong about this. Humans had not forgotten anything. They had simply chosen not to use what they knew. There is a very big difference between forgetting something and choosing not to do it. The Valiant reached New Providence 4 hours after the attack started. The colony was on fire and many buildings were destroyed, but the defensive shield still worked in some sections. The people were still fighting back with whatever they had. More importantly, for what was about to happen, the Vraxian fleet was still in orbit around the planet. They were conducting systematic destruction and taking their time because they believed nobody would challenge them or fight back against their superior military power. Captain Daniel Morgan stood on the bridge of his ship, and he looked completely different from the diplomatic captain his crew had known for years. That friendly, patient negotiator had disappeared and been replaced by something his crew had never seen before. His voice carried absolute authority and command when he spoke to his officers. There was no hesitation and no doubt in his words. He looked at Commander Lisa Grant and asked her about the weapons status. Lisa checked her screens and reported that all systems were operational and ready. The plasma cannons were charged and the railguns were loaded and the missile batteries were armed. She also mentioned the prototype graviton disruptors, which were new weapons that had never been used in actual combat before. Everything had been in standby mode for many years, but it was all functional and ready to fire. Daniel told Lieutenant Kevin Shaw to coordinate with the other human ships that were arriving in the system. He told him to calculate firing solutions for maximum efficiency, which meant figuring out the best way to destroy the enemy ships quickly. He said there would be no warnings given to the Vraxians. There would be no attempts to communicate or negotiate. He said they had their chance for negotiation when they chose to open fire on innocent civilians. 3 more human ships appeared out of hyperspace near the Valiant. The Sovereign and the Liberty and the Constitution all took up positions around the Vraxian fleet. They were all diplomatic vessels just like the Valiant, at least. That is what everyone in the galaxy thought they were. All of them had weapon systems that other species had dismissed as outdated or irrelevant or not dangerous. But those other species had made a terrible error in judgment. The Vraxian fleet commander noticed the 4 human ships approaching his position. He started laughing, and his laughter was broadcast on an open communication channel so everyone could hear it. He said 4 diplomatic vessels and the humans send their negotiators to fight against a military fleet. He said this is an insult to our power and military strength. Daniel responded with a voice that was as cold as ice in deep space. He said, "We are not here to negotiate with you." Then he gave the order to open fire. What happened in the next 60 seconds taught the galaxy several important lessons that would change everything. First lesson was that human ships had never been just diplomatic vessels for peaceful missions. They were actually cruisers designed for long, deep space operations, and they were built with military-grade armor and power systems that could support heavy weapons. Second lesson was that humans had continued to develop and advance weapons technology during their entire period of peace. They had been working in secret on systems that no other species knew about or had anticipated. Third lesson, and the most terrifying one, was that humans remembered exactly how to coordinate fleet actions with deadly precision and efficiency. The Valiant fired its graviton disruptors first. These weapons were invisible to the eye, and they created beams that distorted and twisted space-time itself around the target. 2 Vraxian battlecruisers were caught in these beams, and the ships crumpled and collapsed like paper being crushed in a fist. Their structural integrity failed completely as the local gravity around them went catastrophically wrong and pulled the ships apart from the inside. The Sovereign fired its railguns next. These weapons used magnetic acceleration to launch solid projectiles at incredible speeds that were a significant fraction of the speed of light. The projectiles punched through Vraxian shields like the shields were not even there. They penetrated armor plating that had been specifically designed to withstand plasma weapons and energy beams. The kinetic energy was so massive that it tore through multiple decks inside the ships before exploding out the other side. The Liberty and the Constitution worked together in perfect coordination like they had practiced this exact maneuver many times before. Their missile swarms launched simultaneously, and the sheer number of missiles overwhelmed the Vraxian point defense systems. Each missile carried multiple warheads that separated at the last possible moment before impact. The warheads struck from different angles and vectors at the same time, making it impossible to defend against all of them. The Vraxian fleet had started with 23 ships, but after the first attack wave, only 11 ships remained functional and combat. Capable Commander Vrex was the same officer who had demanded surrender from New Providence earlier. Now he found his flagship severely damaged with multiple hull breaches and failing systems. He sent out an urgent message to all remaining Vraxian ships. He said they are using weapons we have never encountered before. He ordered an immediate retreat and told all ships to get away as fast as possible. But retreating and escaping from human ships turned out to be impossible. The humans had spent decades studying every single species in the galaxy during their time as peaceful diplomats and mediators. They knew everything about Vraxian ship capabilities, including their maximum acceleration rates and their hyperspace entry procedures, and how long it took them to charge their jump drives. The human ships had positioned themselves perfectly to cut off all escape routes before the battle even started. Kevin coordinated the pursuit with brutal efficiency and ruthless precision. He gave orders to target the hyperspace generators on the fleeing Vraxian ships. He said, "Do not destroy the ships completely, but disable them so they cannot escape." He said he wanted survivors who could go back and tell everyone what happened here today. Precision strikes from all 4 human ships hit their targets perfectly. The escaping Vraxian vessels lost power to their hyperspace drives and their main engines. Within 20 minutes of the battle starting, the entire Vraxian fleet was disabled and hanging dead in space. The ships had no power and no ability to move or defend themselves. They were completely helpless. Not a single human ship had taken any significant damage during the entire engagement. The battle had been utterly and completely one-sided. The crew of the Valiant looked at their screens in amazement. Many of them had never seen real combat before. They had trained for it and studied it, but this was their first actual battle, and they had just destroyed a military fleet that was considered one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. They had done it quickly and efficiently and without taking casualties. Lisa looked at her weapons displays and realized that they had only used a fraction of their total combat capability. They had been holding back even during this devastating attack. Daniel ordered rescue operations to begin. He said, "Send teams to the disabled Vraxian ships and recover survivors." He said, "Provide medical assistance to the wounded." He said, "Treat prisoners according to the conventions of war." His crew looked at him with new understanding. The humans had just shown they could kill with terrifying efficiency, but they chose to show mercy when the battle was over. This was not savagery or mindless violence. This was controlled and disciplined military action by a species that understood exactly what they were doing. News about the battle spread across the entire galaxy within just a few hours. Every species that had intelligence networks and communication systems transmitted the same shocking information. The humans who were known as peaceful mediators had completely destroyed a Vraxian military fleet without losing a single ship or taking any serious casualties. The weapons they used were unlike anything that was currently in common service across the galaxy. The tactics and coordination they showed were devastatingly effective and demonstrated advanced military thinking. The Galactic Council called an emergency session, and all the delegates rushed to attend. This was one of the most important meetings in the history of the Council. Ambassador Claire Hunt stood before all the assembled representatives from different worlds and species. Her expression was serious and somber, but there was also strength and determination in her face. She was not apologizing for what humans had done. She was explaining it. She began speaking, and her voice was clear and steady. She said, "You want an explanation for what happened? You want to understand how the peaceful humans defeated a powerful military force like the Vraxians so easily and completely? The answer is actually quite simple when you think about it. We were never peaceful because we were weak or incapable of fighting. We were peaceful because we knew and understood what we were truly capable of doing." A large holographic display activated in the center of the chamber. It showed images and video from Earth history. The delegates watched as the display showed the wars, and the weapons and the terrible devastation that humans had inflicted on themselves before they ever left their home planet and reached for the stars. Claire continued her explanation and said, "We nearly destroyed ourselves completely. Not just once, but dozens of times throughout our history. We developed weapons that could sterilize entire planets and make them unable to support life. We created delivery systems that could strike any target anywhere in our solar system within minutes. We refined and perfected the art of warfare to such an extreme level that we finally understood its complete and total futility. That is why we chose peace, not because we forgot how to fight, but because we remembered too well what fighting leads." To the delegates in the chamber watched more footage from the Earth wars. They saw cities that had been reduced to melted glass by nuclear weapons. They watched orbital weapons platforms engaging in combat that created debris fields, which were still dangerous hazards many centuries later. They observed soldiers using technology and tactics that made the current galactic military equipment look primitive and outdated by comparison. Warlord Thraxus sat in his seat under armed guard. His empire had just lost an entire fleet and his military credibility was destroyed. He spoke out and said, "You hid all of this from us. You deliberately pretended to be weak and harmless when you were actually dangerous." Claire turned to face him directly and said, "We did not hide anything from anyone. We simply chose not to advertise our capabilities. Every single human ship in the diplomatic fleet is actually a warship with full military capabilities. Every colony we have established has military-grade defenses stored and ready to deploy. Every human who serves in any diplomatic role receives complete combat training as part of their education. We learned a long time ago to hope and work for peace while simultaneously preparing for the possibility of war. The rest of the galaxy just made assumptions about us and decided we were naive and weak. The representative from the Morgoth Collective spoke next. It was a shimmering crystalline being that used a synthetic artificial voice to communicate. It said your tactical performance at New Providence suggests very extensive and recent planning. You have clearly been preparing for exactly this type of scenario. Claire nodded her head in agreement and said, yes, we have been preparing for every possible scenario. Did you really think we stopped studying warfare and military strategy when we chose to pursue diplomacy instead? We have tactical computers running combat simulations constantly every single day. We know exactly how to fight every species that sits in this council chamber. We know your strengths and your weaknesses and your military doctrines. We have been patient allies and friends, but we have also been very, very thorough in our preparations. The chamber became completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the floor. The implications of what Claire was saying were staggering and frightening. Humanity had spent 70 years presenting themselves as peaceful mediators and diplomats, while quietly maintaining the ability and knowledge to wage effective war against any potential threat in the galaxy. They had been studying everyone while pretending to be harmless. The Kelthera representative spoke next. Its bioluminescent body was flickering with patterns that showed distress and worry. It asked the question that everyone in the chamber was thinking. What happens now? Will humans seek to dominate the galaxy and control everyone else through military force? Claire answered firmly and clearly. She said, no, we will not seek dominance or control. We still prefer peace over war. That has not changed at all. But we will no longer tolerate unprovoked aggression against human colonies or against our allies. The Vraxians attacked innocent civilians without any provocation or justification. They broke the laws that we all agreed to follow and uphold. They thought we were weak and unable to defend ourselves. They were wrong about that. Anyone else who makes the same mistake will learn the same lesson they learned. She walked closer to where Thraxus sat and looked him directly in his compound eyes. She said, your fleet is disabled, but we did not destroy it completely. Your soldiers are captured, but we did not kill them. We still prefer to show mercy when possible, but you need to understand something very important. You attacked us once and we removed your ability to fight. If you or anyone else attacks us again, we will remove your entire species from the equation permanently, not because we enjoy violence or war, but because we understand that sometimes the only way to ensure lasting peace is to make the cost of aggression absolutely unbearable and impossible to accept. The council chamber stayed quiet and still as everyone processed what they had just heard. The weight of Claire's words settled over all the assembled delegates like a heavy blanket. The galaxy had just learned something terrifying and profound. The patient diplomatic humans were also the most dangerous predators that had ever joined the galactic community. They were not aggressive or violent by nature, but they had mastered violence to such a degree that they understood when and how to use it with maximum effectiveness. Other species in the galaxy were warlike because that was their nature. The Vraxians fought because they were aggressive and territorial. But humans were different. They fought only when necessary. And when they did fight, they fought with calculated precision and overwhelming force. They did not seek glory or honor in battle. They sought victory, and they sought it through the most efficient means possible. That made them far more dangerous than species who simply enjoyed fighting. Claire finished her presentation and returned to her seat. The other delegates began talking among themselves in worried and hushed voices. Everything had changed in the span of a few hours. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted dramatically. Humans were no longer the weak mediators who could be ignored or pushed around. They were now recognized as a major military power that chose not to use that power unless absolutely necessary, and that choice made them even more frightening because it showed discipline and control. 6 months had passed since the Battle of New Providence, and that was what everyone in the galaxy now called it. The entire galaxy had settled into a new way of understanding things. Human diplomatic vessels were now treated with the same respect that people usually reserved for massive military dreadnoughts. Trade negotiations that involved human interests proceeded with unusual fairness and honesty. Border disputes between different Species that might have escalated into violence were now resolved peacefully when humans offered to mediate because nobody wanted to risk angering the humans. Captain Daniel Morgan walked slowly through the rebuilt sections of New Providence colony. The settlement had been reconstructed with new buildings and infrastructure. The defensive systems were no longer hidden away in secret storage facilities. Plasma turrets now stood openly visible on top of towers. Shield generators hummed and glowed where everyone could see them. The message was clear and simple. Humanity would defend what belonged to them, and they would not hide their ability to do so. Lieutenant Amy Parker had survived the Vraxian attack, and she had continued working at the communication center. She was there when Daniel approached the building. She recognized him immediately as the man who had commanded the ship that saved her colony from complete destruction. She walked up to him and said, "Captain Morgan, I want to thank you for everything you did. You saved all of us." Daniel looked at her and his expression showed regret. He said, "We should have protected you better from the beginning. We got too comfortable and complacent. We assumed our reputation for diplomacy and peaceful negotiation would be enough to keep you safe. We will not make that mistake ever again." Governor Richard Cole joined them at that moment. He stood looking out over all the reconstruction work that was still ongoing. He asked Daniel a question that many people were wondering about. He said, "Do you think they will try to attack us again? The Vraxians or maybe some other aggressive species?" Daniel shook his head slowly and said, "No, I do not think they will try again. They understand now what we really are. We are not peacekeepers in the way they originally thought. We are the species that chose peace only after we had completely mastered the art of war. That makes us more dangerous than those species who never learned how to fight properly in the first place." At the Galactic Council, Headquarters Ambassador Claire Hunt had been promoted to the position of Senior Ambassador. Her actual job duties had not changed very much, but the dynamic and atmosphere had shifted completely. Species that used to dismiss human concerns and ignore human suggestions now listened very carefully to every word she said. Recommendations that came from Earth Command were taken seriously by everyone. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted dramatically without another shot being fired beyond that single battle at New Providence. The Vraxians had been sanctioned very heavily by the Galactic Council. Their military forces were now under constant oversight and monitoring by galactic observers. They were not allowed to build new warships without permission. Warlord Thraxus himself was serving a lengthy prison sentence for war crimes and crimes against sapient beings. But the Vraxian species had not been destroyed or eliminated. Humanity had proven its point and demonstrated its power without resorting to genocide or extinction. Commander Lisa Grant had taken on a new role teaching tactical courses to military officers from other species. She shared human military doctrine and strategic thinking openly with anyone who wanted to learn. The classes were extremely popular and very well attended. Everyone wanted to understand how humans thought about warfare and military operations. She stood in front of a classroom filled with diverse alien officers from many different worlds. She explained to them that the key to understanding humans is recognizing that peace and the capacity for violence are not opposite things. They actually complement and support each other. We pursue peace because we truly understand the alternative. We prepare for war because we absolutely refuse to be victims. We are patient because we are confident in our abilities, and we are confident because we know exactly what we are capable of accomplishing. Lieutenant Kevin Shaw continued coordinating operations from the bridge of the Valiant. The ship was now openly acknowledged and recognized as a warship, rather than just a diplomatic vessel. The human fleet had expanded significantly. More ships were being constructed in orbital shipyards, and their military capabilities were no longer hidden or disguised. But these ships still carried diplomats and ambassadors. They still facilitated trade negotiations. They still preferred to use words instead of weapons whenever possible. The galaxy had learned a very important and valuable lesson. Humanity was not a species of natural-born warriors who eventually learned how to practice diplomacy. They were actually warriors who had completely mastered their own violent nature and chosen to pursue peace while still retaining the ability to wage war more effectively than anyone else in the known galaxy. They were patient not because they were weak or scared, but because they were strong, enough to afford being patient, and finally, understanding this truth, the other species grasped what actually made humans truly dangerous. They were not ruled by their emotions or controlled by their history. They were ruled by conscious choice. They chose peace deliberately, but they were fully capable of choosing, otherwise if circumstances required it. Several years passed, and a young Kelthera diplomat approached Claire during a diplomatic reception on Zentara Prime. The young diplomat asked her a question that showed deep thought. The question was, "Ambassador Hunt, do you think humans will always choose peace in the future?" Claire smiled and the translation systems converted that gesture into a tone and pattern that the Kelthera could understand. She answered and said, "As long as peace is possible and achievable, we will always choose it. But we will also make absolutely certain that anyone who threatens that peace understands the full cost of their actions. We are not simple peacekeepers, young diplomat. We are something far more complicated than that. We are the species that knows how to kill with maximum efficiency and chooses not to do so. That choice makes all the difference in the universe." The galaxy continued to turn and rotate through space. Trade between different systems flourished and grew. Different cultures mixed and influenced each other in positive ways. Conflicts and disputes still arose as they always had, but now they were resolved through careful negotiation and compromise. But everyone who lived in the galaxy remembered the day when the Vraxians had attacked New Providence. They remembered very clearly what happened when someone made the mistake of confusing human patience with human weakness. The humans returned to their familiar diplomatic roles. They mediated disputes between angry parties. They facilitated cooperation between species who did not trust each other. They built bridges of understanding between different cultures. But their ships now openly carried weapons systems that made even the strongest military powers feel nervous. Their colonies maintained defensive systems that could repel entire invasion fleets. Their soldiers and officers trained constantly and continuously to keep their skills sharp for a war they sincerely hoped would never come. And in that careful balance between preparation and restraint, between capability and choice, between strength and mercy, humanity finally found its true role in the galactic community. They were not conquerors who dominated others. They were not victims who could be exploited. They were the species that remembered exactly what they were and what they had been and chose deliberately to be something better than their own history. They were the patient killers who sincerely preferred peace.